Every decision you make today costs you a future decision. Not metaphorically. Neurologically. Your brain has a decision-making resource, and every choice you make spends it. In the morning, you have a full jar. You think clearly. You make good decisions. You actually have patience. By 4 p.m., the jar is almost empty. And the version of you making decisions is not the same person who woke up. That 4 p.m. version of you is the one choosing what's for dinner, responding to emails, deciding whether to exercise. And so you order pizza, ignore the email, skip the gym, and call yourself lazy. That's not who you are. That's what happens when you run out of a specific neurological resource, and nobody taught you it existed. This is decision fatigue. And once you understand it, you'll never plan your day the same way again. Think about the last time you had a genuinely productive morning. You thought clearly. You made decisions quickly. You prioritized without agonizing. And then, somewhere around midday, something shifts. Simple decisions start to feel harder. You stare at your to-do list and feel nothing. You open your email and close it. Open it again. Close it again. You stand in front of the refrigerator for 4 minutes and decide on cereal. And the harder decisions, the meaningful ones, just don't get made. This is not a character flaw. It's not a motivation problem. It's a resource depletion problem. And here's the part that changes everything. The jar drains regardless of whether the decisions are big or small. Let me show you exactly what's happening in your brain, because once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. Your prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for willpower, planning, and making complex decisions. The prefrontal cortex runs on glucose, literal blood sugar. Every decision it makes metabolically costs the brain. The more decisions you've made, the more glucose the prefrontal cortex has spent, and the worse your subsequent decisions become. In 1998, psychologist Roy Baumeister ran one of the most cited experiments in social psychology. He put participants in a room with two things, freshly baked cookies and radishes. One group was told to eat only radishes, resist the cookies. The other group could eat whatever they wanted. Then both groups were given an impossible puzzle to solve. The radish eaters quit 3 times faster. Resisting the cookies used the same willpower resource as persisting through the puzzle. It all draws from the same jar. Baumeister called this ego depletion, and it became one of the most referenced findings in behavioral science. Think of the prefrontal cortex as your brain's CEO. Sharp, decisive, but running on a limited expense account. What to wear? That's a charge. What to have for breakfast? Another charge. Whether to reply to that awkward email? That costs more than you think. By afternoon, the CEO is running on fumes. The expense account is overdrawn. And every decision that follows suffers. Now here's where it gets very real. This isn't just lab data. In 2011, researchers analyzed over 1,000 real parole board decisions in Israeli courts. At the start of a session, judges granted parole 65% of the time. By the end of a session, just hours later, parole was granted nearly 0% of the time. Your first thought is probably, well, the afternoon cases must have been more serious. The researchers controlled for that. Case type, severity, prisoner background, none of it predicted the outcome. Only the time of day did. A human being's freedom was being determined, in part, by whether the judge had eaten recently and how many cases they'd heard that morning. The researchers found that after food breaks, the parole rate shot back up to 65% and fell again as the session continued. The lunch break wasn't just a break. It was a cognitive reset. Glucose refueled the prefrontal cortex. Now think about your own day. When do you schedule your hardest decisions? Most people put their most important work in the afternoon, after they've spent the morning on emails, meetings, and small decisions. That's structurally backwards. You're spending your best cognitive resource on the lowest value decisions. And here's what makes decision fatigue especially dangerous. You can't feel it happening. People who are severely decision fatigued believe they're thinking clearly. The impairment is invisible from the inside. The judges didn't think they were granting parole based on hunger. They thought they were being thorough and fair. Every organization, every relationship, every system in your life is affected by when you're making decisions, not just what decisions you're making. When you decide is as important as what you decide. So how do you protect the jar? That's where the deep layer comes in. Before we get to the fix, you need to recognize how decision fatigue shows up, because it's sneakier than you think. Pattern 1, you default to the status quo. The brain under fatigue avoids change at all costs. You've seen this in yourself, staring at two options and choosing neither. Not because you couldn't decide, but because deciding felt too costly. Pattern 2, decision avoidance. Putting off the decision entirely, usually until later, which becomes never. Instead of deciding, you scroll. Instead of committing, you research a little more. Instead of acting, you plan to plan. Pattern 3, the impulsive choice. When the brain is fatigued, it stops calculating consequences and just picks what feels immediately good. The junk food. The impulse buy. The sharp reply you sent and regretted. This is pattern 3. 3 different behaviors, one single cause. A depleted prefrontal cortex taking the path of least resistance. The solution is not more discipline. The solution is designing your day so your best brain handles your hardest work. Barack Obama famously wore only gray or blue suits. Zuckerberg wears the same gray t-shirt. Steve Jobs wore the same black turtleneck. They weren't being lazy. They were protecting their decision budget for the decisions that actually mattered. Now, 4 structural changes you can make starting today. These aren't hacks. They're structural changes to how you architect your day. Ready? Change 1. Front-load your decisions. Your hardest, most important work goes in the first 2 to 3 hours of your day, before the jar starts draining from social, email, and small choices. Do this tonight. Write down the one thing that requires your best thinking tomorrow. Make it the first thing you open when you sit down. Change 2. Batch your decisions. Instead of deciding what to eat every night, plan meals for the week on Sunday. Instead of deciding what to wear each morning, lay out clothes the night before. When you make similar decisions together, you pay the decision cost once instead of repeatedly. Batching is budget efficiency. Change 3. Pre-decide your defaults. Set rules in advance so your fatigued afternoon self doesn't have to decide. Your well-rested morning self already did. Pre-decisions are rules your fatigued self never has to break, because they were made when you had the budget to think clearly. Change 4. Strategic rest breaks. Not to be lazy, but to refuel the prefrontal cortex before it hits empty. A 10-minute break before a major decision is not procrastination. It's glucose management. 4 changes. None of them require more willpower. All of them reduce how much willpower you need. The goal is to arrive at your most important decisions with the most possible left in the jar. That is decision architecture. You don't need more willpower. You need a better system for when you use it. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Every time you thought you ran out of willpower, you weren't weak. You were running an unmanaged resource without knowing it existed. You now have a name for it. You have the science behind it. And you have 4 specific things to change. Now you also know why you feel different in the morning versus the afternoon. You're not 2 different people. You're one person with 2 different levels of a specific neurological resource. Manage the resource. Protect the jar. If you want to understand the third way your brain works against your focus, why it keeps pulling your attention back to unfinished tasks, even when you're trying to work, that's the next one. It connects to everything we just covered. Link is on screen now.